All right, so welcome to the Rebuild Procurement podcast, where we talk about a lot of things procurement, maybe more, different insightful stuff happening in our worlds and in our minds. My name's Tom Finn. I bring 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek. I'm a procurement geek on the client service side of our business. I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals, and we're all doing managed services at a company we call Summit.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
All right, Alan. So we got a few things teed up for today. We got some space. There's a lot of things happening, a lot in the world of, I guess Elon Musk is probably partaking in 3 of these. So talk through some of those interesting technological advances. You went to the SIG conference, and then I might lead off with one about some reflection of mine.
Cool. I love it. Sounds like a good lineup. All
right, so
off with a little space talk.
Sure.
All right.
You lead this. You're the space guy.
Space.
Send you to space here.
The final frontier. The space between my ears is vacuous and great. A big week in the world of kind of exploring and opening up the final frontier, space. On Sunday morning, SpaceX launched Starship 5. So it's the 5th launch of Starship. You can go back and see all 5 launches of Starship, the 5th being the most interesting and the latest, and the one that I think produced the greatest results. It's amazing.
And Starship, Alan, Starship's the big one, right?
Starship is the monster.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I'll do a quick overview of the size of things. So the first SpaceX rocket that really gained widespread acceptance was the Falcon. And this had something like 9 Merlin engines to power it up in space. This is the thing that you see when they talk about launching the satellites that will power Starlink, the Wi-Fi service that SpaceX provides. They'll put those satellites on top of a Falcon rocket, so this is kind of like the smallest. Now, keep in mind, this is still like a 10-story rocket, super powerful. Amazing what the amount of payload that this thing can take into space. Now, the other end of that spectrum, the biggest rocket ever manufactured is the Starship. And the Starship actually it's a crew vessel that sits on top of a big booster engine. And the engines that power the booster for the Starship are much bigger than the engines that power the Falcon, and there are 33 of them. So the amount of thrust that these things generate and the amount of lift that these things give is just phenomenal. And so the latest of these, the Starship is going to be the vehicle that takes us to Mars.
Yeah, and I just for those watching, I just shared the view of these. The thing is enormous. I mean, I guess NASA had the Saturn V, and SpaceX is like way more beautifully designed as well.
A little more aerodynamic.
Yeah, it's like a bullet.
This is also the futuristic
version
of this. So it doesn't quite look like that just yet, but I suppose we'll get there. And then you could see the Falcon 9 in there. Now, intermediate between Falcon 9 and Spaceship is this thing that launched just yesterday called the Falcon Heavy, where you basically have the Falcon 9 plus 2 more 9s on either side of it. So you get Falcon 9 times 3. And that the NASA used this Falcon Heavy to launch another spaceship into space called the Europa mission that's going to head out to Jupiter and one of the moons of Jupiter, the moon Europa, and it's going to be kind of doing a series of flybys. So it's going to take 5 years to get there, 5.5 years to get there. So 2030, mark your calendars. That's when we're going to start getting some interesting data back if everything goes right. But then it's going to do some flybys over the series of 4 years over this moon of Jupiter. And the whole idea is that we'll get some data about whether there are the raw ingredients in the atmosphere to produce life on Europa. And I heard somebody characterize it as whether there might have been life previously, today, or in the future at some point in time. They're just checking to see are all the right elements in place that could support life on this moon of Jupiter.
Yeah. The idea is that it has a lot of ice, right? Isn't that sort of what they view? Like where there's ice, there's water. Where there's water, there's life. That's kind of the 1-2-3 punch there.
That's right. They're looking to see if they can detect the precursors of life, so some rudimentary carbon-containing compounds underneath the ice cap in what they believe to be a salt ocean that sits underneath. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. But back to Starship, because Starship is just the coolest thing ever. It's huge, and this fifth mission was by far the most successful mission. It allowed them to test several things, but two big things. First of all, can they get a flawless lift out of the atmosphere? And they did that. And they were able to put the Starship into orbit for a significant period of time, and then very successfully bring it down and land it on the surface of the ocean. So it was quite a thing to see this thing come down and set down relatively gently on the ocean. And they were able to recover almost all of the Starship components. But the second thing that they did that was huge was they need rapid reusability for these boosters. So think about putting payload into space. In order to colonize a place like Mars, you need lots and lots and lots of payload. So you have to have the ability to rapidly reuse. That's the operative term. Rapidly reuse these boosters. So the booster shot Starship up into space. It fell back down. They were able to orient it such that it was able to be captured by the same tower that launched it. And it's this tower is called the Mechzilla. SpaceX loves to do these fun names. So the tower is called the Mechzilla, and the manner in which it caught it is called the chopstick. So it basically just has
Oh, that's the term.
Grab it.
I mean, it looks
Yes.
like that. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it's quite an amazing thing. You can see all of this on YouTube. We'll put links in show notes. It's definitely worth a watch. And the notion of rapid reusability is you catch this booster, and then because it's caught right back on the tower, you basically load another Starship on top of it or another piece of payload on top of it. You fill its tanks, and inside of an hour, up it goes again.
Oh, no way. Really? Is that quick? I didn't realize the turnaround time was like that. Like essentially like a bus station for those things. Like just pull in, refuel, get going again.
That's exactly right. So it's quite a thing. And I think one of the things that makes this most intriguing for all of us who are watching at home is the engineering marvel. The engineering that goes into this is it's still mind-blowing. When you watch just the simple Falcon 9 take off and then the booster come back and land on its own little tripod, it sends chills up my spine because it's just such an engineering marvel to watch this incredibly large, heavy thing return back to Earth and then be reusable. So think about the scale on which they're doing it now with the Starship and the booster involved there. It's almost unbelievable. And by and large, everything that SpaceX has promised, even though they have not necessarily delivered to the wild, speculative, fast timeframes that they've promised, they've delivered and delivered amazingly quickly for the amount of engineering that goes into these things. I think the latest thing that SpaceX talked about was they want to try and grab the next Mars window, which comes open in about 2 years, to start sending payloads to the surface of Mars. And undoubtedly, that's a little bit aggressive. Will we make that one? We might not make it in 2 years, but think about it. If we're making the goal of sending payload to space in something like 4 years. About every 2 years, the window when Earth is closest to Mars opens up. So we have a chance to send stuff there about every 2 years. If we do that in 4 years, that's before this Europa mission even becomes active, right? This will be within the 2020s, within this decade, sending perhaps not people, but certainly payload to Mars. To me, that's just mind-blowing and awe-inspiring.
Yeah. And payload is stuff, right? So essentially what it could carry. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
payload could be food, payload could be satellites, payload just could be essentially weight of things.
Yes. Structural. If you think about setting up a colony on the surface of Mars, you have to have so much infrastructure in place because you have to set up domes and structures, and then you have to recreate Earth atmospheres. There's just a bunch of stuff you have to do in order to establish life on Mars. And that's the ultimate, if you read the mission statement of SpaceX, it is to make the human species interplanetary. So the big claim of SpaceX and its founders and leadership is we basically have one copy of the blueprint for life. It's the only one we know that exists in the galaxy, in the universe today. Now, doesn't mean it's the only one. It's the only one we know of. And that blueprint for life exists only on one spot. So it's like having data stored on one drive and, having a catastrophic event happen that could wipe out that data. What we want to do is we want to send the blueprint for life to other planets and perhaps to other solar systems and perhaps to other galaxies eventually, so that this blueprint can live on and be copied, be replicated elsewhere. So that's the goal of SpaceX.
Yeah. And Elon had quite a week. He also did the We Robot. I think it was We Robot. Is that what you called it? So
Yeah.
the show of their, I guess it was a test. So they have their robot. It's called Optimus, I think is theirs. Technically so Elon has multiple companies. He owns X, he owns SpaceX, he owns what was Twitter, Tesla. He owns Tesla. I think those are the big three, right? And then there's the subsidiaries.
Yeah,
It might have been something
Neuralink
else.
and a whole bunch of others. But yeah, he's when you think about what his calendar must look like, right? It's like, oh, what am I doing today?
Yeah, which company, which multi-billion-dollar company do I give a little bit of focus time to? But the Tesla, just call it like that, the Tesla show that they had, I think they called it We Robot. They rolled out a few different things. One being like a new model of the Tesla. Then they had the bus, which would be pretty cool because it's kind of like an electric trolley, more so than a bus, is what I kind of took it up as. And then the third thing was these robots, which online, so people would be interviewing. They had one like serving beer, and they had a few just walking around with a person around them, but it may not totally be there. They seem to move really well, uh, but no one really knows to what point they're a version of autonomous, like that they could do stuff on their own, be it talk or move on their own. So that was kind of the other thing. Did you see that, Alan?
I did. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Glimpse of the future to come. The future always comes a little bit more slowly, or maybe it under delivers in the short term, but then it usually over delivers in the long run.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But there's a few different companies doing this robot. Humanoid is what it's called because it kind of is a human version of a robot. So just given the way that the world is set up, everything countertops at a certain level, drawers, all of that kind of stuff. So in order for a robot to be, sufficiently support you in the real world, it needs to kind of be set up like a human. That's at least the idea behind these current sets of robots. But the movements on these things pretty unbelievable, right? Like the way these things move around, like the ability to grip, the ability to, irregardless of if it's doing it by itself or if it's being remotely controlled, a portion of it, it's pretty crazy. A few years ago, they had the dancing ones, right? The one that kind of looked like a dog, and then the other one that kind of looked like a human, but really looked like a robot. These things are pretty wild now.
Yeah, they really are. And when you start to get into the engineering and the science behind it, it is fascinating. I heard someone speaking from one of the robotics companies saying that they used to, in order to get that sort of hand sensitivity that you just referenced, Tom, they used to put the servo motors that control fingers inside the hand itself. But then biologists pointed out that no, actually, when you're controlling your fingers, you're not using largely muscles in your hands. You're using muscles in your upper arm. So scientists started pursuing putting motors in the upper arm, and all of a sudden, you got better, finer control of the fingers at a distance because of the leverage and some other things going on. I mean, it's the things that they're discovering and improvements they're making on a daily basis with the engineering side of this are just, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, and then tack that together with AI, and then the ability to do things. That's kind of where my mind goes as I watch those things. I'm like, oh man, like the convergence of some of these things. It ends up being like maybe discovery, maybe it's just engineers recognize about the your upper arm being able to control more of the hand. Just as things converge, that's really where magic starts to happen. Because if you have a ChatGPT version of a mind, and then you have like the ability to move and communicate through the humanoid robot body, like, oh man, then that's at a minimum you'll be able to disrupt industries.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was exciting to
And
watch. Weird, right? Because you forward look for them, even though it might not be there today. To your point on the long term, but yeah, it was pretty wild.
it is. It's makes me want to live another 1,000 years to see how it all plays out. Who knows? Maybe that's in the cards too.
Yeah, maybe you only maybe. There you go. Yeah, we can just move your self awareness to the one thing to the next.
That's right.
I was listening to something on they had this documentary on Bitcoin and like who started Bitcoin, which is this guy Satoshi, and they're talking. They came to a certain conclusion, but then the guys I was listening to, they were talking about, I forget who you might recall who the people think is the inventor of Bitcoin. Do you have that name? Anyway, that guy, he like
Nope.
cryogenically froze his head. So
Yeah.
he's
Nobody knows.
no, but there's a guy that everyone that the
Hal
community thinks.
Finney. His name's
Yeah,
Hal
Finney.
Yeah.
Um,
It's pretty close there, Tom.
yeah, I know. Yeah,
Maybe you're written into the will.
I have I have that $750 billion in Bitcoin. But yeah, so but he like cryogenically froze his head. And there's all these like stories around it because okay, if it gets unfrozen to get to the point, then can you have? He has the codes in his head to unlock that Bitcoin. But
Yeah.
it makes for a fun story.
All I can think about is young Frankenstein and the brain that's in the vat. And which one did you get? Abby Normal. Yeah, he's freezing of brains and freezing of heads.
Yeah.
Jump in the shark.
Yeah. So maybe the last little AI piece here. So I was looking as I generally do on X on Twitter, and as you know, I use ChatGPT for a lot of things. I generally both Google and ChatGPT things if I'm really trying to think through something and it's a little more nuanced, which a lot of my questions are. I go to ChatGPT first, but Google's catching up too. But I saw someone had prompted it. So after you use ChatGPT for a while, it kind of builds an understanding of what it is that you like the questions you ask and how you ask them. And someone said to post to get feedback from it, like based upon my interactions with you, what are some things you could tell me about myself? So I did this, and it's pretty cool because at first, like ChatGPT is always nice. It's basically like, oh, you're a great guy and whatever, so thoughtful, things like that, right? It's not exactly what it said, but it broke me down a bit, which I think you'll appreciate these things, especially knowing the types of like questions I would ask. So it's kind of like how you search for things. So the first one is loosen the grip on structure. It told me. Does that resonate with you? For me, Alan?
A little bit, yeah. You put together these elaborate documents with bullet points and
Yeah.
points. Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
I think through a lot of stuff. I try and think. One that I think I do, trust your instincts more. But it's kind of like lean into. It's kind of like the same thing as loosen the grip. I think all of these might be. All of these are kind of a reflection. Like it always, ChatGPT loves to give you max bullet points. Sometimes I feel like it kind of says the same thing. But trust my instincts more. Delegate and empower others, which is something for what I know I search for. I'm definitely like diving in deep on my own. Here, yeah, it's kind of repeated itself. Embrace imperfection. Which over the years I've gotten pretty decently at, but clearly not my searches.
All good All good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
And then incorporate feedback more selectively. So I think it's all just saying like trust your gut and loosen up, man. Like
Yeah.
stop with the perfectionism. We'll see if I choose to take any of ChatGPT's feedback into play. But I think it's kind of a thing that I just generally like, which I'd ask the AI for too. But I like to ask people. It's just like what I can generally do better. Like what areas can I improve? We're so blind in multiple ways. One is just like the day goes by and you do your thing, so you don't tend to reflect on the day. And then another is just getting feedback from different people. Sometimes the most important feedback is the ones you don't want to hear it from because it's going to be the most critical. But really, those should. I do wish that people would treat feedback on a regular basis more like okay. I feel like a lot of people don't want to give it because you don't want to offend, and then in a lot of cases, people don't want to receive it because they don't want to hear the bad qualities. But that's not a way to improve yourself. So yeah, I'm a big fan of feedback. Just a note for you, Alan. Always open to it, but
So am I. I always like to say I have thick skin. So I love the feedback as well. And it's an interesting thing. I think in order to be able to take that feedback, like you said, and be open to it, yeah, you got to practice for sure. But I think you have to be okay with yourself. You kind of got to be, as they say, comfortable in your own skin. Otherwise, some of those pieces of feedback, even the one, oftentimes feedback will miss the mark. And you got to be okay hearing it and saying, okay, I see that part of it. I don't see that part of it, but maybe I'm blind to that part of it. Maybe I need to spend a little bit more time thinking about it. But you got to take the feedback in a positive spirit that it's there to improve. And
if somebody's being an a-hole,
you can always shoot it at me.
Yeah.
Fire away, Tom.
Yeah. No, but if somebody's being like mean, then you can take zero of it, right? Or you take still probably a little bit of it, but it's just from a poorly delivered feedback. But usually people aren't. I think people are pretty sensitive to others. But yeah, it's always who's giving it matters a lot, and situational. There's a lot to dissect to properly take it in. Like if it's your boss, take it firmly. Like understand it's important, at least in their minds, even if it's bad advice. But is what they're kind of communicating what their expectations are. But yeah. So anyway, if anyone uses ChatGPT, it's an interesting exercise just to go through and just like get some. And again, it's very specific. My questions, I tend to like ask like the 5 whys to ChatGPT to try and dig deep into something. So it's also, again, grain of salt, but nevertheless, a decently fair assessment.
That's great. Maybe I'll go this week and ask it about myself. See
Yeah.
what it has to say. That's great. You want me to dig into? So last week, our episode, I was broadcasting from Palm Springs. I was at the SIG, formerly known as.
Yeah, we don't need to just hear about how you had a great time, though, Alan.
Yeah, well, I think I shared with you when I was there, 115 degrees. So it was a lot of time indoors. And it's a conference. That's what you do. You do indoors. SIG puts on a good conference. Dawn and her whole crew really work hard and put together a good conference. It tends to be a great networking event, and it's billed as being low commercial. So
that's the only kind of conference that's worthwhile going to.
I know. It's so true. I go to a fair number of conferences. I've certainly been to a bunch in my past, and SIG is one of the ones that I think does the best job of allowing for networking, actually even making networking more possible. But Dawn is always the person who leads SIG. Her name's Dawn Tiura. She's always on the stage wagging the finger saying, but if you're too commercial, we're going to kick you out. So they're always watching for that, and it's pretty good. So they have one of the networking events that I think is excellent, in addition to all the cocktail lubricated events that just help. One of their main.
I feel like you could go dry, Alan, and you'd be fine.
I mean, listen, I'm fine. When I came home from the conference, I actually had a long drive home from Denver because I was bringing a car back from Denver. Long story.
Oh,
but I went 2 nights without alcohol. So, it's like not a problem. No big whoop. No big whoop.
Yeah.
But that's to make up for all the cocktails, all the alcohol that I consumed at the SIG conference, which is probably still in my system. But they put together this cocktail lubricated event they call speed networking, and just picture tables set end to end in a circle. Call it 30 tables. I mean, it's big.
Oh, wow.
The circle is probably 100 feet by 50 feet. It's actually a square. It's 100 feet long, 50 feet deep, in a circle. And inside the circle, the buy side attendees go, and on outside the circle, the sell side people like me go. And then every 4 minutes, they ring a bell, and you shift one seat to the right. And so it's just like this big conveyor belt of networking.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's actually really nice. And, the whole idea is you say, hey, here's my name, here's where I live, here's my company, what do you do? And you just share a little bit of information. So it's those sorts of things that go on at SIG. And that was certainly one of the highlights. I think there's a big emphasis at SIG on presentations and on topics, on education and learning and sharing best practices. And I think probably one of the best presentations that I heard came in the last day. It was one of the last presentations. The chief procurement officer from REI, so the recreation company based out west, gave a relatively unstructured, off-the-cuff discussion about outsourcing and about his experience and the company's experience with outsourcing some very tactical procure-to-pay, some P2P and AP work to India. And he talked very much about his approach to humanizing that relationship. They have 38 resources in Bangalore, and he talked about the great lengths they went to run a great sourcing event to make sure they chose a partner that was well-suited and right-sized for this outsourcing. So as you know, a 38-person outsourcing is pretty small in the world of outsourcing. They went with one of the big players. He was pretty careful not to mention the name, but of course that world's pretty small, so you could figure out who it was pretty quickly. The upshot of the
Post it in the chat. I feel like I probably know.
Yes, you probably know. The upshot of it, though, was he believed now I think they're in year 2 of this outsourcing. He believed they've achieved great success, largely because he wants to approach this as a partnership and not as a slave and master relationship, which, being a supplier, being a provider in the procurement services industry, I've felt that slave master relationship multiple times. There's almost like, I like to think of it almost like a Shakespearean play where, Shakespeare writes the roles. You'll be the buyer. And then, oh, yeah, poor you. You'll be the supplier. And I'm going to write the lines, and you guys have to play these parts. Yes, you'll bow and scrape. And yes, you'll lord it over them. And it's almost just like watching a play. And sometimes that can be a comedy. Sometimes that can be a tragedy. And I think the chief procurement officer at REI really went to great lengths to say, we want to make this a deeper partnership than that. So he sent team members over for months at a time to work alongside the BPO provider. He brought people back from India to company headquarters to kind of get the culture and get the feel for what REI culture is like. And there's just a very close relationship. There's no expectation that things are going to be smooth and perfect. There's an expectation that you got to work through things. And it was very clear that he had a spirit of partnership that I certainly have seen lacking in other BPO relationships. And it felt to me like he had a more successful on average BPO relationship than almost anyone I'd ever seen before.
Yeah. That resonates. I think it's very like that. Maybe it still clearly you're dealing with it, but that like early 90s, like call it when like the GE Fords, when they all went after like cost savings and they just outsourced a bunch of stuff. I feel like they just did it and they beat everybody up. They beat everybody up internally, externally. They just didn't care about the people at all. They just said, I want to see my spreadsheet numbers go down. Like these go down and these go up. So like costs go down and EBITDA or whatever they were shooting for went up. But yeah, it's definitely, at the end of the day, people are people. So some folks just work for different companies and like your end customers are different. But it really, you're just trying to work and do good work. Like there's no reason to be an a-hole to people at all in business. That's always like one of my like core tenets, just like no reason to be an a-hole. If you're pounding somebody on costs, like have a reason for it, let them know. If you have leverage, you do. And you can use that, that's fine. But no reason to be like just not a nice person because of it. I've been at different companies that have multiple companies that have outsourced were at the early stages of outsourcing. And I think REI probably has just a better culture than most companies. I think a lot of times the ones that don't care to integrate a supplier also probably don't do a great job internally with their people and being good cross-functionally.
Yeah, that's right on.
Yeah.
I think that most when you say, don't be an a-hole to your provider, it's probably also the fact that they're an a-hole to most of their employees as well.
Yeah.
We certainly know companies that look like that. Yeah, you're going to get much more out of a partner if you approach that as a partnership and not just a master slave relationship, master servant relationship. So yeah, that was the upshot of that presentation. I'm going to try my best to get that chief procurement officer on this podcast. Might be one of our first or earliest guests, and maybe we'll talk through that very topic. He could do a much better job giving his philosophy than I can secondhand.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, and that's one where I think a lot of folks can learn something from with that, because it does go wrong a lot. Like
a lot.
Yeah, a lot. We don't even need to go further than a lot. I'd estimate that if companies are just outsourcing, I don't need to estimate. If companies are just doing it for cost, then you're not doing it for the right reason, because there's certain things that can and could be sent to another time zone, right? Another like culture may be important, but it's not the most important. We've talked about it before a few episodes back about like the reasons you may or may not outsource certain things. And if you're not giving thought into that, you're going to fail because you're not doing step one. So you can't just assume a new person you're onboarding is going to be up to speed in 2 months anyway. There's also transition time, all these other things. So yeah, I have to be very mindful of those things.
Anything happening in your world this week in procurement, Tom?
So I deal a lot with BPO stuff too. Not so much this week. I think something that I would just like call out just for people in general is just given that it's budget cycle right now. So we're talking mid-October. So anywhere between, like 1 month ago and 1 month out is usually when your budgets get set. So from a real tactical standpoint, make sure you're connecting with the different folks. So you have different stakeholders internally, suppliers, year-end contracts and even things that are going to be for next year. If they're going to be heavy hitters, start those conversations now. Big conversations for big contracts should always be 6 months in advance, whether or not you're going to switch. So you should just sort of keep those fires hot. So yeah, I would say just connect with people right now internally. And if you're not, like, ping them, set up time, set up 15, 30 minutes with them.
Proactive is the name of the game. Yeah, we in the work that we do for our clients, we call this busy season. Q4 always.
This is busy season everywhere.
Everywhere, end of the calendar year. And you're right. If you're not feeling busy, that probably means that there's an earthquake about to go off because you just haven't yet gone and found the source of the stress. Meet with people, talk with people, try and understand what they're trying to accomplish. Otherwise, they'll drop. It seems very common. They will drop a big, a big contract or a big sourcing event on your lap the week after Thanksgiving. They get it off their plate. You'll see it Wednesday night at 9 p.m. before Thanksgiving, and they'll expect it to be done before year end, and then your holiday season will be wrecked.
Yeah, for sure. And then also for suppliers, if you're talking with any of the big ones, like a lot of them have year-end discount type stuff, but you got to get it in now. You got to start talking about it now. So just be mindful of that. If that matters, that's always a strategy you can lean on. You don't have to, but you can talk to them about it.
Always ask.
Always ask.
That's my motto. Always ask.
Yeah, there's no ain't no shame. Ain't no shame.
Nope. The only thing they could say is no.
It's true. Yeah, they're not going to give up your business. So we had a procurement cycle thing on the back end here, Alan. And we're sort of buttoning up against time. Do you have a few extra minutes, or gotta hop off?
Well, no. Why don't we do this? Why don't we tease with it? So last week we talked about policies, and we talked about the importance of policies. The week before that, we talked about intake. I think we're trying to build a picture of kind of what a world-class procurement organization looks like, and the tools and techniques they use to get jobs done. So I think that we wanted to walk through a typical procurement cycle, and maybe just as a way to tease it, well, why don't we hit that next week? Do you want to outline what you think about in terms of procurement cycles?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to look at this, right? There's the sourcing cycle, which Alan, do you know who came up with I don't know if it was a 5 or 7 step sourcing cycle or a sourcing process?
I'm going to take a wild guess that it was A.T. Kearney.
So wild, yeah. But I think it's important to know that they come from consulting companies, and
that's a company. Yeah, it's a consulting company. It's interesting. The McKinsey, I think, is one of the largest first consulting companies, but I believe that A.T. Kearney and McKinsey worked together and split off, and Kearney did work.
Oh yeah, you mean
even prior to McKinsey becoming official? Yep.
You mean Kearney himself? Was it?
Yeah, that's
Tom
right.
Kearney.
The AT. Yeah, probably his middle name.
Something. Yeah.
Tom? I don't know. Well, okay. We'll come back with more information on that next week.
Yeah. We'll come up with that. But so there's different things to look at, right? You have your different cycles. You have your sourcing, like the 5-step sourcing process. You have your procure to pay. But we'll dive in a little more just generally how it works within a procurement cycle. So from the ask through kind of the end of payment and then the contract renewals. That was sort of the idea, to go through it a little bit different than others may be looking at it.
I like that. Yeah, and I mean at its fundamental level, when I think of the procurement cycle, maybe you see it differently, but I certainly see the cycle as being, number one, planning. So that's category management. Number two, sourcing. We could talk about the steps of sourcing. Number three, contracts management. So you're doing the contracts, you're ratifying what you've agreed on in the sourcing step. And then 4, across the long life cycle of the supplier relationship, you're doing supplier management. You're trying to get the most out of your supplier. And you're doing some payment and so forth on the end that's very tactical, but that's kind of how I see the procurement cycle.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the one, and it probably goes to the supplier management piece, is also how you manage deliverables. Especially younger companies, kind of you just got to get stuff done, and so much is unmanaged. And it goes a lot to, unfortunately, what's written in the contract, the scopes of work, what you're agreeing to early on, because many companies, many suppliers can be more seasoned than the companies themselves that are hiring them. So it's just that piece of knowing what you're getting and making sure that it happens. Sometimes got to be a little heavy-handed, and I think that's maybe where some folks or some companies lack.
Love it. Yep.
So exactly. Yeah, so we'll dive into that next week, Alan.
Okay. Sounds perfect. Another good one, Tom.
All right.
Peace.
All right. That's it. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebuild Procurement Podcast. Like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your pods to stay up to date on the latest content.
We want to rebuild.
Rebuild it.
It'll take me a month to rebuild it.
Rebuild.
That's how you rebuild, comrade.
Rebuild.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.
Rebuild.